Hi folks, welcome back again to another episode of Mr. Hines Classics channel. In this episode I'm back in Athens, this time checking out the theatre and the Sanctuary of Dionysus, whilst also exploring the Athenian festival of drama known as the City Dionysia. Let's dive straight into it. So I'm up here on the Acropolis looking down at the theatre, and I thought I'd start off with some context. So drama was a favourite pastime of the Athenians, with performances dating back to the 6th century BC with the actor Thespis, who gives us the term thespian, which is another term for actor. Before this theatre was actually put in place, we know that dramatic performances would take place in the Athenian Agora, their marketplace, which is just over there where you can see Athens Mint. By the mid-6th century, this theatre was built into the south side of the Acropolis, as part of a whole sanctuary that's dedicated to Dionysus, who's the god of wine, revelry and drama. So as I now head down to the theatre, I'll tell you a little context about how the City Dionysia was established. So initially, the rural town of Eleutherai, which is in northern Attica, would celebrate a festival that honoured Dionysus in something called the Rural Dionysia. The main event of this festival was a procession, or a pomp, which would end with singing and choral competitions. Later, during the 6th century BC, the better known City Dionysia Festival was established, and this not only combines events of the rural festival such as the procession and the choral competitions, but also included dramatic plays that would be judged in competition. This then establishes it as a dramatic festival. So there's an interesting story that goes along with the establishment of this festival. As I say, the City Dionysia seems to have started in the mid-6th century BC, when the Athenians made an alliance with that town in northern Attica called Eleutherai. As a sign of goodwill, the people of Eleutherai offer the Athenians a simple wooden statue of Dionysus, which for some reason the Athenians reject, which is never a good idea. Following this, the Athenians seem to suffer some sort of plague that affects male genitalia, and the Athenians link the two events together and believe that they've angered the god, though this seems to me like some sort of suspicious excuse for a mass STI outbreak. Anyway, whatever the reason, they let Dionysus into the city, and they build a sanctuary to him and honour him in a yearly festival of drama and revelry, which is called the City Dionysia. So before we can explore the theatre and the sanctuary complex in any more depth, this boat, located a little distance away from the sanctuary, holds some relevance. So like the rural Dionysia, every year the City Dionysia would start off with a pomp or grand procession, in which a statue of Dionysus was wheeled into the theatre on a wooden boat, which I believe is the same wooden boat shown here in the game. I'm guessing that the boat is used to reflect Athenian naval prowess. And during the height of the Athenian Empire, this procession was accordingly used by the Athenians to showcase their strength, their wealth, and display various gifts and weaponry. After the pomp, there was a Theatron contest where members of local tribes would take place in an amateur choral dance dedicated to the god Dionysus. Following this, there would then be an evening of revelry known as the Komos, with plenty of drinking and dancing. So as I now head back over to the theatre, I'll say more about the structure of the festival. So the day after the Komos, that's now day 2, the playwrights would announce the titles of their plays, and the judges would be selected in a ceremony known as the Proagon. By the mid-5th century BC, this would actually take place in the structure next door to the sanctuary, in this square building over here, which was the Odeon of Pericles. Later on in day 2, there were 5 comedic performances that would all take place back to back. The most famous of these Greek comedians was Aristophanes, whose plays were usually very satirical of leading political figures, whilst also including a good amount of slapstick and silly comedy, and some very rude jokes as well. Then, days 3 to 5 were reserved for 3 tragedies each day. Tragic playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles and Euripides would all present plays, usually focused on mythological stories, with weighty themes like fate, death and the role of the gods. As the name suggests, the plays never really go that well for the protagonists. Days 3 to 5 would then conclude each evening with satyr plays. This was comedic relief after a full day of tragedy. They'd usually be farcical interpretations of mythological stories, with the chorus dressed up as satyrs, the half-man, half-goat followers of Dionysus. After the final play was wrapped up on day 5, the plays were then judged and prizes were awarded. So we're now inside the sanctuary itself, and the theatre is just in front of us over there. Although the sanctuary itself is really small, it still contains all the usual features of a typical Greek sanctuary. We have a temple dedicated to Dionysus over here that would house a cult image. And we also have an altar over here that would be used in the opening ceremony, both for a sacrifice and for libations to be poured out to Dionysus. The whole sanctuary was then surrounded by a short wall which encloses it in and marks it off as a religious space. So I'm now entering the theatre itself, which was first constructed at some point in the mid-6th century BC, when performances would move from wooden bleachers inside the agora to a now dedicated spot in the newly built Sanctuary of Dionysus. Originally, this structure was made out of wood, as the game demonstrates here, but later it was rebuilt out of marble. This theatre could sit about 17,000 people, and the tiered seating, or the Theatron, was built into the south side of the Acropolis. It's built in this horseshoe shape to optimise the acoustics, and there are clear divisions that I'm walking up here that give easy access from back to front. And either side of the stage, to the left and to the right, we have these entrances and exits known as the paradoi. So seating was of course segregated by class, with religious officials and politicians usually getting the front seats. And although this is quite debated, it seems quite likely that women weren't allowed to attend. We know that attendance to the festival did cost, apparently 2 obols a day to attend, which would be a day's wage for an unskilled worker. The Athenians set up something called the Theoric Fund in the late 5th century BC, which was a fund to allow poorer citizens to attend, which showcases just how central entertainment and drama was to daily life in Athens. From the seating, we look down at this flat area here in front of the stage known as the Orchestra. It was here that a group of singers and dancers known as a chorus would perform odes in Greek plays. This group, about 12 to 15 members in size, although integral to the plot, were not allowed on stage, and they stuck to this strict convention throughout different performances. Although playwrights like Euripides, for example, would sort of push the limits of how far this was allowed, and he does, for example, in his play Medea, have the chorus discuss amongst themselves whether or not they should go on stage and stop the action that's going on. The game depicts an altar here, and tripods as well, and first excavations of the site did indicate that an altar would be present in the middle of the orchestra. However, I'm not really sure if this is still the case by the time we get to the mid-5th century BC, especially given the fact that we have that larger altar back over there that would be used for the opening ceremony. So during the opening ceremony of the festival, something called a tribute was displayed in the orchestra, in front of all the guests. This tribute was donations of money that was initially provided to a confederacy of Greek city-states known as the Delian League. This was used to fund the building of ships and the defence of the Greek world after the Persian invasions, but it's now being used by the Athenians, who had taken over the League, to fund their empire and their ornate building projects, such as the Parthenon. So it surely must have been contentious for these officials attending the Dionysia, not only to have to provide tribute and have that displayed in front of them, but to also have to sit in the shadow of the Parthenon, a building that their money had been used to fund, rather than for the defence of the Greek world, and Plutarch speaks of the frustrations that the use of this tribute caused. So behind the orchestra, we then have the stage, known as the Proskeneion, and a backdrop known as a Skene. Later on, the Skene develops to be 2 stories tall and show a facade of structures such as a palace. In Greek theatre, most plays would take place outside. The inside of buildings was never really depicted. The Skene, especially later on in Greek theatre, was very practical. The entrances of the building were used as a means to get on and off stage, as there were no wings. Additionally, props could be stored inside. There must have also been some sort of ladder inside the Skene to allow actors to get onto the roof. Such performances would have been enhanced by the use of machinery as well, and props, such as like the mechani for example, was commonly known in Latin the deus ex machina. This was a sort of crane which would hoist actors into the air to perform the roles of gods. There's also a device called an ekiklema, which is a sort of revolving trolley which would turn inside the doorway of the Skene. This would be used to reveal dead bodies in Greek theatre, because death itself was not really shown on stage, so instead these bodies are sort of wheeled in. Although we do have another contentious area like in Euripides' Hippolytus for example, where Hippolytus is fatally wounded off stage but is brought in on stage to have his final words. So Greek plays were written to show only 3 actors on stage at any one time, and if there was need for further characters, actors would play more than one role. They would change their costumes and they would change their masks. 4 actors are depicted on stage here, so either the gamers got it wrong, or perhaps one of these figures, probably the guy on the right over here, would be a director. And speaking of directors, the whole festival was organised by a figure called the eponymous Archon. This would be an Athenian magistrate who was elected for 1 year. He would pick the playwrights for the festival, that's 3 tragic and 5 comedic, and he would pick also a financier for each playwright, known as a choregos, or a chorus director. This would ensure that all the costs were covered. But the term chorus director is a little misleading, as it was still the job of the playwright to direct the whole play. So I think that concludes our tour of the Sanctuary and the City Dionysia. I've tried to make this particularly useful for those of you studying festivals on the OCR myth and religion topic, and also other areas of Greek theatre. Thanks again for watching. Please do like and subscribe, it really does help the channel grow, and I'll catch you guys all in the next one.